Hello everybody, welcome back to Quest for Truth. And before we get into our topic today, I just want to let you know that there are a few announcements that are coming really soon. Just a few things that we're finishing up on, a couple of things, a few things that are a little bit further out, but we're definitely working behind the scenes to bring a handful of things forward. And so those things will be announced pretty soon. But our topic for today in our series, the 10 Commandments. We're working through them, and we're at the 7th commandment today, and that is again found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. Now, as we've seen with the latter 6 of these commandments that we've looked through so far, we've noticed that there is a moral imperative here, that of God giving this law as a moral right or wrong, which is the means of which sin is defined. Essentially, it is breaking God's law, doing these things, committing sin. But there's also a bit of a social aspect of them too. I mean, this is how you love your neighbor. And so there is a part of these that we'll see going through this, that it's all of these, including this one, to not commit adultery, is required in order to have a society that really works. And we'll talk about that as we go ahead. Now, one of the things when you think about committing adultery is that we don't think about it as really that bad, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but it's really something that our culture doesn't see as a top crime. We have murder is a, an offense that is, you'll go to prison for life even, or in some places we still have the death penalty, and so that is something that is looked at as very bad. Stealing is looked at as generally bad, not as bad, but adultery is something that we don't look at as badly. And so I want to take a second to put in perspective from the Old Testament what the crime, or what the punishment was related to the crime of adultery. And so Leviticus chapter 20, and we won't go through this whole section, but really 10 through 21 really give an in-depth look at the different crimes related to adultery, to sexual sins and that kind of aspect. But I'm just going to read the first verse here. It's again Leviticus 20, verse 10. If there is a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. And so to our ears today, that is a kind of a almost outlandish punishment, to be put to death because of committing adultery. But that is really brings you to what God's heart is for this commandment of not committing adultery, to not, like, how evil this is before God. And we don't really see it that way, especially our culture. And so we really need to kind of come back to this idea of how bad adultery is, and how sinful it is against God, and giving a little bit of a New Testament kind of approach to this. there are a number of passages in the New Testament that talk about this topic, but one of them that really stands out to me is in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now, this is Paul talking to the leaders, to the church in Corinth, and so there'll be some things that we'll talk about that are cultural, and we'll talk a little bit about how they relate to our culture, how the commands in here relate to our culture. So 1 Corinthians 6, verse 15, going through verse 20. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take away the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? May it never be. Or do you not know that the one who joins himself to a prostitute is one body with her? For he says, the two shall become one flesh. But the one who joins himself to the Lord is one spirit with him. Flee immorality. Every other sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the immoral man sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? For you have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. Now, a couple of times, prostitute comes up. So culturally, when Paul wrote this to Corinth, he was addressing, and in a lot of Greek culture, there were temples to these false gods, and in these temples they would have prostitutes to these gods, and it was a very common practice of, you would go to the temple and you would be with these prostitutes, and so these upstanding members of society, with even ones that would have their wife, and they would consider themselves pretty moral. They would consider themselves as having one wife, and yet they would go down to the temple and commit adultery. Not that the culture didn't say it was adultery, the culture said it was right, but here Paul says, no, this is committing adultery when you follow this manner of the culture. And so putting that in mind, when you think about our culture today, when you think about the greatest areas of sexual sins in our culture, I think really two of them really stand out. And I think if Paul was writing this letter to us, I think instead of talking about these temple prostitutes, he would have instead have been talking about basically sex outside of marriage, which is pretty broad, and then pornography, which is also a huge problem in our society. And so both of these two things are fit within this idea we can take from, we should not join ourselves, right, verse 16. Do you not know that the one who joins himself to a prostitute is one body with her? And so this idea in our culture of casual sex, if you will, this idea of, whoever has, however many, get as many partners as you can, and that's a positive thing. A high body count, as they like to say, and a higher number is good. And you just connect yourself to all of these different people. But Paul says, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? And if your body is a member of Christ, how do you go and take that same body that is a member of Christ and connect it sinfully to someone else? How do you know? And again, it's not that that person has to be this evil kind of person. I think it's easy to think about that as like, oh, this person's bad, so we shouldn't like, but even if it's another Christian, perhaps connecting with that person, becoming one with that person outside of marriage is wrong. So how do you be one with Christ and attempt to be one with someone else in a sinful manner? And we have the Holy Spirit in us, and that we are a temple of God. And so, and when he talks about the two becoming one flesh there, what he's talking about is that's quoted there from the idea of Adam and Eve becoming one flesh. And so what we're talking about here is really marriage. And that's really how this relates to culture as a whole, is because strong marriages are based upon the idea that a man and a woman will come together and be will be one with each other, and that's it. There's that honesty there, that idea of there'll be nobody else. And so when you still have this idea of, well, I can still look around and go other places, you can't have strong marriages. And strong marriages is the foundation of strong families, and strong families are the foundation of a strong society. And so having that strong marriage there really is what allows us to have a society. And we've seen in our society, as the family crumbles, our society at large begins to crumble. Now, the other aspect of it that I talked about was pornography. You can say that, well, I'm not actually doing anything. We like to, as human beings, we like to draw lines that don't exist and then get as close to that line as we can. But Jesus puts that idea to rest.